That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco, and today we're talking about the best slot versus wide analysis, the top wide receiver matchups this week, folks. Breaking down our slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis that you could find for free on razzball.com. It is a great resource, so go check it out. And of course, if you have start-sit questions and you can't get a hold of us on the show today, we will be live for 2 hours. That's right, 2 hours before kickoff on the Sunday Live. So subscribe to the channel, follow us on YouTube at Razzball Fantasy, and join us every Sunday for 2 hours as we do our Sunday Live Start-Sit show. But today's show is the slot versus wide top matchups starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And that's right, folks, from all the way around the world, it's our favorite Australian, Ben Wasley. You can follow him at Fantasy First Down No O on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
You're right. I actually have to turn my screen upside down because I'm actually hanging from the ceiling at the moment. That's how we roll down here.
Amazing. Does the water go the opposite direction? Just answer the question. I think we all need to.
I have no idea. It goes in the normal direction for me. I don't know what direction it goes in over there.
Oh my God. Next time we're going to have to start the show. You're in front of your toilet. I'm in front of mine. We flush.
We'll just flush at the same time and we'll find out.
And we'll get it figured out. We're going to get it figured out. I think it's the only question. And no one even cares about slot versus wide, who scored the most points. They want to know which direction the toilet flushes in Australia. All right. Well, today's show is a slot versus wide matchup analysis. If you haven't heard about our episodes of what we do, we actually break down fantasy points scored by slot and out wide for receivers, and it helps you identify the best matchups for outside receivers and slot guys. On today's show, we're going to cover the top 5 out wide matchups. We're going to cover some notable slots, and we're also going to cover some downgrades for the out wide. So that's what today's show is. Let's get into it. First off, the top 5 out wide matchups. And there's some big names here, folks, and some names that have struggled early on in the season that we think are going to have monster weeks. That includes the Bengals going up against the Titans, the Panthers going up against the Vikings, the Raiders versus the Chargers, Bears versus the Broncos, and the Texans going up against the Steelers. So the second team, of course, is the defense. And I make it even easier because we're going to break that down right now. Higgins and Chase versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Titans have allowed the most fantasy points out wide this season. So talk to us, Ben, quickly about this matchup. Now, I know Chase is in. We all know he's in. Higgins probably in. But what's your thoughts about these guys, redraft and also daily fantasy?
I think the big question about these guys that everyone's been asking is Joe Burrow healthy? And the answer is, well, probably not. But he's healthy enough to start both of these guys. Higgins has 28 targets this year, and he hasn't caught a lot of them, and that's a problem. But you can't sit him because we know how explosive he can be. He had a massive game in week 2. He struggled in week 1 and 3, but that wasn't for lack of targets. They just weren't connecting. Against the Titans, there's going to be a heap of point scoring opportunities. You absolutely have to start him. You have to start Chase. If a guy's a start, even if he's had a couple of poor games, you have to keep starting him, especially in this perfect matchup.
So, obviously, auto starts for me. Both of them are auto starts. I think DFS, I have them in my lineup. I want to get a both in if I can with Burrow, if possible. The biggest thing with the Tennessee Titans is they are one of the most pass funnel defenses in football. They could stop the run. Joe Mixon's probably not going to have a lot of success. But the one thing that is interesting is last year, it wasn't as much fireworks as you would think. They did play last year. It was a defensive-minded matchup, and Burrow was healthy then. So it does give you a little pause, but I just don't care. Like, if this is why we play fantasy football, okay? The matchup's good. And by the way, Higgins, you're right. It's all missed opportunities. It's not like the targets aren't there. I mean, there was like a game where he had 2 touchdowns and he missed by like that much by stepping out of bounds. It was wild. So I think Higgins is all in for me. I'm getting him into my lineups. And I actually do think I'm going to get them both in DFS as well. This one is not as easy. Now we got number 2 on the list. The Minnesota Vikings have allowed the second most fantasy points out wide. DJ Chark and Brandon Marshall for the Terrace Marshall, my apologies, are the 2 guys that line up out wide right now. And Jonathan Mingo last week took a step back and actually played behind Marshall while Chark led the team in routes. Now, of course, there's one huge caveat. It's the Adam Thielen revenge game. And you got to think they're going to pepper him with some targets in this game. So what's your thoughts about the Carolina wide receiver core? Are you giving any of these guys a shot in your lineup this week?
Look, they seem to be peppering Adam Thielen with targets no matter who he plays against. So this week, you'd have to think he's going to be really busy. I guess it's a question of whether it's Bryce Young or Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton threw an insane amount of times last week for some reason. Who knew that Andy Dalton, your ginger friend, was the guy they needed to bring in to release the offense? I can't see myself starting Chark or Marshall. I'm probably not going to be rostering them on many rosters either, and I'm in some pretty deep leagues. The reality is, even though they might get a fair few targets, they're not going to be reliable targets. It's really hard to know how this offense is going to look with Bryce Young there. I just don't trust them enough to be starting them. Maybe DFS, they're solid dart throws, especially Marshall. I suspect he's probably going to be pretty cheap in most. So I'd consider them there, but in leagues, I can't imagine myself starting either of them.
So the notable performances for first of all, the Vikings are very young at corner. Byron Murphy, who's their main slot guy, who's their veteran, is also banged up. So this is the perfect storm. They have inexperience. They are still learning that Brian Flores scheme. You know, Mike Evans, Devonta Smith, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams all went off over 20 PPR points against them. Now, what does interest me a little bit, I think Adam Thielen is the start of the group. Obviously, I just think Bryce Young and the way he looked the first 2 weeks, it seems like Thielen's probably your safest PPR play, probably a nice floor. And you know what? I'm buying the revenge game narrative, okay? I'm thinking Adam Thielen's going to get some targets in this game. They gave up on Adam Thielen. I think they're not going to just say, sorry, Adam, we're going to throw to DJ Chark and Terrace Marshall this week. No, I do think that Adam Thielen's the pick of the play. If you go check out our slot first wide, the Minnesota Vikings are not good anywhere. So I think Thielen will be your lead guy. I do think Chark is an interesting DFS play this week, especially because he's low budget. And also, you know, he does offer you that high A dot, you know, upside play, especially in a milli. So I think if you got a buy down option you need, I think DJ Chark is a solid option. He's looked good. And he looked good this offseason too. So I actually do think that Chark is interesting. And if you're desperate, he could be a wide receiver 4 in this matchup. Let's jump down to number 3. These two guys have been absolute studs. Davante Adams, auto start. Davante Adams against the Chargers last year was absolutely dominant. Here's Davante. I just want to talk about Adams because he's obvious. But 8 for 177 and 2, 10 for 141 and 1 against these Chargers last year. Get him in your DFS lineups. I think he's going to be an absolute stud this week. But the other guy, Jacoby Meyers, has become, I think, probably a locked-in wide receiver 2 in some lineups. A guy that you got in the double-digit rounds. He has been fantastic. What's your thoughts about Meyers and Adams against these Chargers this week?
Look, I'm starting Jacoby Meyers in the rare leagues where I have him. I don't have him in a lot of leagues for whatever reason. That was my miss. But this week, I'm definitely starting him. He's averaging 11 targets, 8 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. Now, that's not necessarily going to happen every single week, but the upside is clearly there. He's getting so many targets because they're being forced to throw, and there's not a lot of options. I expect the same will happen this week. So I'm starting Adams, obviously, also starting Meyers. They're definitely the guys to target in this offense.
You know what the interesting thing about Jimmy Garoppolo is dealing with a concussion, so we'll see what that means. Brian Hoyer's the backup. Brian Hoyer is probably going to get you – he knows the offense better than anybody at this point, not named Tom Brady, because he's with the Patriots for so long. But the Chargers pass the 6 score is Sports Injury Central. Basically, they identify the passing defense. So 100's really healthy. High, like 90s is like basically every team that's healthy right now. They're at 68.2. So they're banged up in the secondary right now. And so the other interesting thing is that Jimmy Garoppolo, the one thing he does well is he funnels his targets to certain players. He did that with the 49ers for a very long time. It was all Kittle. It was all Debo. It was all Ayuk. That's all he threw to all the time. And so he's doing that now with Adams and Meyers. Like, to me, if you have Jacoby Meyers and you can't start him in a top 3 matchup, then you either have the greatest lineup I've ever seen, or you shouldn't even have Jacoby Meyers. Then you clearly don't trust him. Trade him because you don't trust the guy. Get him into your lineups. I actually have him in DFS as well. He's very well priced on DraftKings. Go put him in your lineups. You won't regret it. Now, here's one's controversy written all over it. Got DJ Moore. We got Chase Claypool going up against the Broncos. The Broncos were a complete dumpster fire last week. 70 points against the Dolphins, folks. That's not a typo. That's not even a verb typo. I don't even know what I would say there. 70 points. I said it. I didn't write it. Whatever. You know what I mean. They got crushed by Miami. Crushed. Now they get the Bears, who are just this. It's going to be just two dumpsters and two fires just next to each other. Dumpster fire everywhere. But it could be really fun for fantasy football. So what's your thoughts here, Ben? Are you giving DJ Moore a shot this week? Chase Claypool against that Broncos secondary.
I mean, I'm really nervous about Pat Surtain. You have to think he's going to follow Moore the whole time. There's not much else they can throw to. They're not going to try to cover Darnell Mooney most of the time. I don't really want anyone in this offense anyway. And Moore, when he's against a possible shutdown corner, I'm really even more nervous about him. I know that you can score on the Broncos, but the Dolphins can score on absolutely anybody at the moment. They're just looking really good. Plus, they did a lot of their work on the ground as well. So because I don't think the Bears have that same sort of upside, because Justin Fields just hasn't looked good so far this year, DJ Moore's a real, scary flex option if you're really desperate for me.
I get it. And I know that's why we do this show, because we want to make sure we provide context to the matchup. But with the Broncos situation, Terry McLaurin 2 weeks ago, we kind of had the same conversation. All right, they have Jahan Dotson. Maybe they didn't shadow. We didn't know. Terry McLaurin finds the end zone. He has a solid game. Tyreek Hill completely crushed them last week. Crushed them. They didn't even have Waddle, so it was just Tyreek Hill. So Surtain, Tyreek Hill's Tyreek Hill. I get it. I get it. He did a great job against Devontae Adams. But is that more because Jacoby Meyers on the other side was dominating his matchup? Chase Claypool has just been non-existent. I just feel like DJ Moore is a hedge for me. I admit that. He's a wide receiver 3. I am not going to sit him because of the Surtain matchup, but he's not an auto start for me this week. I am going to be the most hedged person ever, mostly because I do think that, first of all, if you look at the Bears, they're banged up in the secondary. No Jalen Johnson, no Eddie Jackson. They're going to get, if the Broncos can't get it done against this Bears defense, then what are we doing? If Justin Fields can't keep up in this game, then I'm just going to have to spend the next week eating ice cream and capitulating all my Justin Fields takes. This is it, Justin. Just get it done. Throw the ball to DJ Moore just enough to make him a wide receiver 3 so I sound smart. All right, let's jump down to the next one, folks. It's Tank Dell and Nico Collins. I think we're all excited about these guys. But one thing I found really interesting is that Tank Dell is the new hotness. Everybody loves Tank Dell, but Nico, no one cares. Nico Collins had 150 yards 2 weeks ago, and it seems like nobody cares. It's all Tank Dell. They're playing against Pittsburgh. Now, talk to us a little bit about this matchup. Are you a Tank Dell or Nico Collins guy this week? What's your thoughts here?
I think Nico Collins is a little bit more boom bust than Tank Dell. Tank Dell, you're kind of expecting to get a lot of targets, just a question of how much he's going to do with those targets. Nico Collins, he might get a heap of targets and have a massive game. He might have a quieter game. I like both of them. They're both wide receiver 3s for me. I'd start them in most leagues. There's just a lot of upside there. We know that CJ Stroud's having to throw a lot. The Steelers are someone that you kind of have to throw on a little bit, which is surprising, but it is what it is. So I'm happy to start either of them. Heck, I'm even happy to start Robert Woods in most situations. I don't feel great about any of them, but for the most part, at this point in the season, you're going to have to start players who have reasonable upside in most leagues. So unless you've got a really shallow league, you're probably starting Dell and Collins in nearly every single league.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I have Nico and Tank in one league, both. I scooped them up, and I have DJ Moore in that league, and I'm just like, I know I'm going to make the wrong decision. That's all I know. You
cannot start DJ Moore in that situation. Don't do it to yourself.
Don't you dare.
Not worth it.
All right. Well, okay. I'll think about it. I have a long weekend. I do a lot of overthinking on Saturdays. It's my favorite day to overthink, so I'm excited there. So the good thing about this matchup is, number one, the Pittsburgh Steelers have faced some really good receiving duos. So it was Debo and Ayuk, and then it was Adams and Meyers. And both those guys, those duos, got double-digit fantasy points, each of them. So it's not as if Pittsburgh has been dominated by alpha number 1s and then the number 2s haven't done anything. So that's good. The other thing that I thought was interesting, though, is that the Texans' offensive line is decimated by injuries right now. And the one thing the Jags don't do is rush the passer. They have no pressure on the quarterback. But there's one thing the Steelers do is they get after the quarterback. So my only thought process here is the Texans looked very good last week, but I think it's because the Jags couldn't put pressure on them. Now you have a Pittsburgh defense that I think you get after the quarterback a little bit. But who does that benefit? Like, I think both Tank Dell and Nico Collins have high ADOT players. That if you look at their stats on PFF, they're both been high ADOT guys. I'm leaning Nico, and here's why. If you look at ironically, the player who lines up on the left side of the formation the most over the last 2 weeks is Amari Cooper and Devontae Adams. That's where Nico Collins lines up, and that's against Levi Wallace. That's my thought process. So I'm going Nico, slightly ahead of Tank Dell. I don't know if that makes sense, but you know what? I got all this ridiculous data. I'm going to use it once in a while.
You got to do something with the data. You got to make use of the data. I believe it. I believe
Thanks, man. Hey, let's see. If Nico does not outscore Tank Dell, see you later, data. We'll find something new. All right, let's take things a little bit deeper and head to the slot matchups. Those are the ones that you kind of have more deeper names if you're looking for maybe a streamer or a DFS dart throw. Let's talk about some notable slot matchups, including Elijah Moore versus the Ravens, Chris Godwin versus the Saints, and Christian Kirk against the Falcons. Let's talk about Elijah Moore first. The Ravens, surprisingly, are we all know they're banged up. Marlon Humphrey's been out for pretty much all season, but they have been getting crushed in the slot. Third most fantasy points allowed to the slot this season. Notable games, Tyler Boyd, 6 for 52. Josh Downs, 8 for 57. So what's your thoughts about Elijah Moore against the Ravens? Are you willing to put him in as a wide receiver 3 this week?
It's one of those really scary situations where he's getting a heap of targets. He's got 25 targets so far this year. That's a really good number. That's top 20-ish. So that's the kind of guy you want in your fantasy lineups. The problem is, even though he's catching a fair few, we caught 9 from 9 last week, he hasn't gotten over 50 yards yet this year. So is he going to produce? I mean, he's probably not going to score a touchdown. He hasn't looked close to scoring a touchdown, particularly most weeks. He's not getting big yardage. He's not doing a good enough job after the catch. But if you're in a PPR league, it's probably still worth starting. The reality is that those targets are going to come to him a lot of the time, and he's going to catch a lot of them. They don't really have a lot of other options. Obviously, they've got Cooper, but outside that, there's really limited other options for them to pass to. They're going to have to use more. He's probably going to catch a fair few of them. He won't get the yardage, but that's a really low floor and a kind of safe guy to put in your flex spot.
In PPR formats, I agree. I think that's where you got to focus. And he has 25 targets in 3 games. So the targets are there. Deshaun Watson's schedule has not been great. This early season schedule has not been easy. And I think the Ravens, they are really banged up, but they always find a way to be like a serviceable defense. Right now, their 6 score is 51. That is their secondary defense 6 score. That's like they're half of what they're expected supposed to be. That's how banged up they are. I think that from a PPR standpoint, he's probably going to get you a high floor, double-digit fantasy point day. But this could be an ugly one. I think those AFC North games are ugly. They always end up being. The offensive line for the Ravens is banged up. We don't know. And by the way, no Odell, no Rashad Bateman. You know, it's going to be a tough day, I think. I think you're looking at a 17-14 type game here. But I do think there's enough volume to get him some PPR points. So that's why I'm okay with Elijah Moore. Let's jump down to the next one. And this is kind of a 2-parter. Chris Godwin versus the Saints. Now, I think the first question I have to ask is, we know Mike Evans gets shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore. And Matt Lattimore has gotten the best of him more often than not. Now, the question is, at this point, every year, I feel like we all delete it out of our minds. And then everybody starts Mike Evans against the Saints. He goes 2 for 15. And we're all like, what the hell happened? Are you going to, if you have Mike Evans, are you starting him? And then also talk to us a little bit about Chris Godwin against the Saints.
I'm starting Mike Evans, but I am scared for exactly the reason that you stated. We know this has not been his favorite matchup, and I'd be very worried about what could happen. If I have another viable wide receiver 2 style option, I might be starting them over Evans, but I'm not going out of my way to sit him. I'm not sitting him for a Tank Dell or Nico Collins style. I'm sitting him for a Jalen Waddle style play, a clear wide receiver 2 guy where I'm kind of wide receiver 2 versus wide receiver 2. Who do I want to start? That sort of situation, I'm sitting Mike Evans. In most situations, you've got to start him. There's just so much upside. He has these blow-up games that can win you your week. And in reality, if he has a bad week, it's not going to be the thing that loses your week. One player having a bad week does not lose your week in fantasy. So if a player has a lot of upside, it's worthwhile starting them. Chris Godwin, on the other hand, doesn't have a lot of upside most weeks. This week, on the other hand, there's enough there to start him in PPR, I think. I think he could end up with a lot of targets. We know the type of player he is. He hasn't started the season particularly well. I'm a little bit scared about how Baker Mayfield is using him. But if Mike Evans is going to be shut down, and that's a big possibility, Chris Godwin's got to be the guy they go to. They just don't have a lot of other options. The Saints are pretty strong in general, but the slot has been the place to target them. That's Chris Godwin. I'm starting Chris Godwin if I have him in a league with few other limited options.
Maybe Baker Mayfield is the secret sauce that allows Mike Evans to finally dominate Marshawn Lattimore.
He is the Baker.
He is the Baker. And so if you look at his stats historically, and it goes back so far, and Marshawn Lattimore, let me just try to filter this. Over the last, since 2020, he's got 7, 10, 12, 2, 9, and 9 PPR points. So 9 points, whatever. It's not even worth sitting him at that point. He's too hot right now. He's the wide receiver 5 in PPR. So I don't think you sit him, but he's probably a wide receiver 3. He's a DFS fade. But Godwin's, on the other hand, though, is outside the top 50 in PPR scoring right now. I didn't fade. I had both Evans and Godwin right at ADP. And I was like, I don't really want either of them because of the Baker thing. And I was like, I leaned Godwin because of historically with Jarvis Landry, all that stuff. I mean, boy, was I wrong and right at the same time. I was right to be skeptical of the Bucs, but man, Mike Evans is blowing up. I will say this. If Mike Evans, by the way, had the second softest out wide schedule to start the year. One of the easiest schedules, right? So moving forward after this, he's got the toughest schedule rest of season out wide. There could be a sell high window here. A Mike Evans plus a low-end RB2 to get Chase might be something you explore. I'm just giving that warning. Chris Godwin this week for me is a wide receiver 3. I have him locked in. 7 regular season games he's played against New Orleans. 6 double-digit fantasy points. 5 of those games were 13 PPR points or better. If you look at the opponents who have faced the Saints this season, Nick Westbrook-Akine, 4 for 58. Adam Thielen, 7 for 54 and 1. Jaden Reed, another slot guy, 6 for 63. Not too shabby. Let's jump down to the next one. It's Christian Kirk versus the Falcons. Now, I know what everyone's thinking. Calvin Ridley revenge game, and you're probably right. And I think because Zay Jones is out, you're probably going to start both these guys. But the matchup says Kirk. The revenge says Ridley. What's your thoughts about Kirk's matchup this week? Are you all in on Calvin Ridley's revenge game?
It's really hard with Christian Kirk. With Zay Jones out, he does become the clear wide receiver 2 in that offense, and they can clearly sustain at least 2 good wide receivers. I think Calvin Ridley's definitely going to be one of them. Zay Jones seemed like he was going to be the second one, but Kirk's taken that over with Jones being out. They clearly wanted to target Kirk in week 2. They seem to believe, excuse me, for some reason that was a great matchup for him. I'm not sure that it was, but they just fed him the ball. Will they do it this week? Well, I really do believe the Ridley revenge game matchup. I think there's something there, and I feel like they need to get Ridley going because he has been struggling the last couple of weeks. Does that mean I sit Kirk, though? I wouldn't say I'm going out of my way to sit him. I'm just not going out of my way to start him. He's someone that I'm interested in starting if I need to. He's in that kind of wide receiver 3 flex conversation. But I don't definitely want to go out of my way to start Kirk because he could have a really quiet game in this matchup, depending on how things play out.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm in on him. Zay Jones is out this week. I think Ridley, they got to feed Ridley, right? I mean, after everything fell apart with the Falcons, if they don't go out there and give him double-digit targets, I think he'll be pissed. I think he's got to be, ready to go and dominate those guys. But, I mean, the matchup leans Christian Kirk, 8th most fantasy points allowed to the slot. Now, some of that has to do with Jaden Reed scoring 2 touchdowns for the Packers. But Amon-Ra, who's always good on a bum wheel, had 9 for 102. So I think that you're right. He's a wide receiver 3 play this week for me as well. I just like the narrative of the revenge game. So I think Ridley's going to get force-fed targets either way. But I do think that the matchup says it's good. No Zay Jones. I think you go with Christian Kirk as a wide receiver 3. Before we jump down to some notable downgrades, do you have a quick question? Craig Morrison, what's going on, buddy? Thanks for joining the show. Sutton, Pickens, Thielen start 2. What's your thoughts, Ben?
I mean, it's a tough one. Sutton's just really hard to trust at the moment. Anyone in that offense is hard to trust, but I'm starting Sutton. Thielen, I mean, he had a really big game last week. I think you probably have to start Pickens, though. So I'm going Pickens and Sutton. I really don't like sitting Thielen. There does feel like there's upside, but it's hard to tell how much of that was just Andy Dalton throwing the ball a heap of times and how much we're going to see a Thielen revenge game. I'm not so sure that we're going to see it enough for me to start him over those two guys, though.
Don't you dare sit Adam Thielen in his revenge game. I'm actually going to – I might believe in this Houston Texans defense. There's something going on there. They have taken away the outside guys. We just saw what they did to Calvin Ridley, so I could see that happening again here, especially with no Deontay Johnson on the other side. There's no real other threat. Al Robinson, is fine, I guess. But I'm going to go Sutton. If Sutton can't get it done against this Bears secondary, I would drop him. Just drop him because you're never going to know when to play Cortland Sutton. If Sutton does not get it done this week, there's no point. Just telling you right now, he's in my lineup. Adam Thielen revenge game, good slot matchup. Come on, Ben. You got to love it, man. You got to love it, right? I mean, come on. It's all right. All right, let's talk about the last one. Some notable matchup downgrades. So it's got two of them here that we wanted to highlight really quick. Zay Flowers against that Cleveland Browns secondary, who's just – the Browns have become this dominant defense. What's your thoughts here about Zay Flowers? I know there's no Odell. There's no Rashad Bateman. Are you starting Flowers anyway? What's your thoughts here?
I mean, I'm starting him, but I'm nervous. He hasn't been great the last 2 weeks, but he's not a big touchdown scorer, so he's never going to be great in half PPR. In PPR, I think you've still got to start him just because they're going to have to use him, but you're not expecting the same upside that you're going to get from him most weeks.
I think this for me is I'm going to sit him. I mean, Chase and Higgins, DeAndre Hopkins, those guys all did not even hit double-digit fantasy points in PPR against this Brown secondary. Two offensive linemen are banged up for the Ravens. I think Lamar is going to be running for his life. I think he'll probably get you, 5 catches in this game, maybe for like 40 to 50 yards. I just don't see the upside. So I'm just going to pass on him. I'm going to probably fade him in this one. Let's talk about the second one. It's Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle against the Buffalo Bills. Now, the question for you here is, we know you're probably not sitting these guys, and we wouldn't be crazy. Maybe Waddle? What's your thoughts about Waddle potentially in this matchup? Is he an auto start for you? And also, any thoughts about DFS? Are you willing to buy up for these guys?
It's the same as Zay Flowers. I'm kind of willing to sit them, but I'm not going out of my way. Waddle's higher than Flowers is by a long way. He's a good 10 spots higher. He's more like a wide receiver 20 region as opposed to Flowers, who's down in that kind of wide receiver 3 region. So Waddle, I'll sit him if I have other good options, similar to Mike Evans, but I would ideally like to start him just because we know this could be a big blow-up game. Could be a really high-scoring game where both teams score a lot of points. Maybe the Dolphins are just forced to throw against the Bills and therefore Waddle gets really busy. Maybe they attempt to shut down Hill and that gives Waddle a lot of opportunities. There's enough reasons to think that maybe Waddle could have a big game that you probably want to be starting him if you don't have other good options.
So the Bills really haven't faced too much yet. Devontae Adams got his 6 for 84 and 1. Last season, in the 2 regular season games, Skylar Thompson started the playoff game. Waddle was over 15 fantasy points in both those games, and Tyreek Hill was at 22 PPR points. The other problem with that, though, is Tre'Davious White was not around. He was not healthy last year. Tre'Davious White is a game-changing cornerback who's now playing better. You can't sit Hill, but my personal take on this is I'm not going to buy up for them in DFS. And Waddle, I have the Nico Collins of the world. So Nico Collins or Jalen Waddle, who would you take in that scenario?
I'd still go Waddle. Waddle's still in that wide receiver 2 conversation for me. I think guys like Collins are a little bit further down. I feel like Waddle just has much bigger upside than those guys. There are situations where they just have a massive blow-up game like they did against Denver, but do it through the air. I'm not saying that's likely, but I feel like they might need to attack the Bills and take some risks. And for that reason, I feel like Waddle's a guy that you'd probably regret sitting if something like that happened. There's just enough upside, enough reasons to start him that I can convince myself it's a good idea.
Okay, well, they're just added to the questions I have to answer for this weekend. I'm super excited about that. All right, we do have another question down here, folks. Just traded Derrick Henry for Mixon and Christian Watson. Please make me feel better about this trade. Zmoney XV, Z Money XV. Ben, what's your thoughts here? Do you like the trade? getting Mixon and Watson for Derrick Henry?
In PPR, I don't mind it. I mean, as a general rule, my philosophy with trading is try to be the person getting the best player, especially if you're going to receive 2 players for 1 player. You want there to be a very small downgrade to make it worthwhile getting that second player, because that second player probably isn't a very big upgrade over whoever you would have been starting in that spot anyway, unless you've got a really deep roster where you're starting like 5, 6 wide receivers in a week. For that reason, I often don't want to be downgrading the best player in the league. But in this case, Henry to Mixon, that's not a big drop. So in PPR, I like it. In half PPR, Henry has so much upside. I really don't like giving him away, but he's looked awful this year. So I'm fine with it. I think it's fine. I think it's about a wash.
Yeah, it depends on what if Watson's now your flex guy or your wide receiver 3, right? And if you were really hurting there, yeah, it's not a big time downgrade. I think if you needed a third receiver and you had nobody, it was a wasteland. Sure, fine, you did all right. But Derrick Henry, I just think at some point they're gonna have to just say, sorry, Derrick, we apologize for not giving you the ball 20 times. But that's Tim Kelly for you. Tim Kelly was not a big time run scheme guy with the Texans, so that could be the issue there as well. Jamie, joining the show. What's going on, man? Always good to see you. Patricio, how you doing? Good to see you as well. We're about to wrap up. We got some streamers and some stashes. Ben, take it away, my friend.
Look, Tutu Atwell's a guy that I really wanted to talk about this week. It's not the greatest matchup. He's taking on the Colts, who are very good matchup for wide receivers in general. But against the slot guys, they've kind of got Kenny Moore there, so it's not always a great matchup. But I love Tutu this week. I think everyone's focused on Puka Nacua. The reality is this whole offense could boom this week. It could be a shootout against the Colts. They could end up being really busy because I kind of like the Colts a little bit more than most people do. I feel like they could end up behind the Rams, and I really want to be starting Tutu Atwell this week just because he's been so effective for so many weeks in a row. Another guy that you can consider a little bit lower down is Joshua Palmer. Unfortunately, Mike Williams out for the season. Thoughts and prayers, Mike? But Joshua Palmer is the guy that comes in. I know everyone's talking about Quentin Johnston, but Quentin Johnston has clearly been the wide receiver for this year. Joshua Palmer's the guy they're going to go to. There's a lot of targets available. They can't keep giving Keenan Allen 20 catches every single week. Austin Eckler coming back will create a little bit more space as well. Joshua Palmer is a guy I consider streaming this week, and he's definitely someone you want to stash. He's probably been taken on waivers in your league, but if you have him, he's someone you can try starting this week. If he's available in your league, you absolutely have to pick him up. He's a guy with true wide receiver 2 upside, and there's not many of them out there available.
All right. Well, before we close the show, Ben, we got one more question from Z Money XV. He asked the question, Jerome Ford, Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris, and Mixon start 2. What's your thoughts here?
Oh, gosh. I mean, look, I don't like many of them this week. Mixon and Stevenson have bad matchups. Najee is falling behind Jaylen Warren. We talked about that in the preseason. I talked about how Jaylen Warren was probably going to be the Tony Pollard in this offense, and Najee's going to be the Ezekiel Elliott. The problem is the Steelers aren't the same as the Cowboys were last year. They're just not as good, and that means Najee doesn't have a lot of value, but he's got a great matchup this week. So I'm starting Najee, and I feel like you kind of have to start Mixon. There's just so much upside of the possibility he gets a touchdown. They're going to struggle to run on the ground, but they do give it to him around the goal line. So I'm starting Mixon and Najee.
Let's see what I got here. I wasn't prepared for running back questions today, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not the theme of the day.
Yeah, no, right? It's a wide receiver show, guys. Come on, you're throwing me off. I don't have my spreadsheets open, but I got it open now. We're good. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with Stevenson. Yeah, I'm gonna go Ramondre Stevenson and then Najee Harris. I just mix it against Tennessee. No, thank you. Ford against Baltimore. I mean, they're really banged up, but I think I'm gonna still go Stevenson, and I'm gonna go Najee Harris there as well. All right, folks, that's all we got for today. That's it. We have the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you follow Ben on Twitter at Fantasy First Down No O. Make sure you follow myself at Bobby LaMarco. And make sure you go over to razzball.com and check out the slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis. It is a fantastic tool. It is free. We also show you where the fantasy points are scored by receiver. We also show you rest of season schedules. So it's a great trade tool to go find players. It's all free on razzball.com. And once again, don't forget to join us Sunday live for 2 hours for the Sunday Live Start Sit Show. We are going to be breaking down all your start sit questions live on YouTube. So subscribe to the channel and join us. I want to thank my co-host again, Ben. I am Bobby LaMarco. We are out of here, folks.